Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of CMO Talk. This week, I'm thrilled to bring someone that I've known for a long time to the show, and someone who not only walks a lot of the same path that my partners and I walk on a regular basis, but who I happen to think is incredibly smart. So I am introducing you to Laura Patterson, who's the founder and the president of a company called Vision Edge Marketing. Laura, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Shelley. It's such a pleasure to be with you and your team. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a long time since we've seen each other in the real. But, we were talking before the show about a little bit about your company and the roots of your company. And, why don't you tell our listeners that? Because I think that's an interesting story and one that's pretty relevant to our discussion.
I suspect that I'm not very different from many of the CMOs that listen to this program. My career started in marketing. I'm not going to go too far back, but a long time ago. And when we co-founded and created Vision Edge Marketing in 1999, can you believe it'll be 18 years this summer? It was the idea that data, analytics, process, and measurement were really critical capabilities that marketers needed to bring to the table if they wanted to create value and propel growth for their companies. And so that was really our thinking and our passion. I had come out of the semiconductor industry, the software industry, the financial services industry. I laugh when I say this, but it's really true. I've only worked for two kinds of people in my entire 30 plus year career, and that's engineers or accountants. So it's all about the numbers.
That's right. And actually I was remembering about our conversation when we met at a conference years ago, and that was what particularly resonated with me because many of my clients have been engineers, and it's a different ball of wax when you're trying to explain to people who are very smart, very well educated, and who often think that they kind of have the solution to everything, and to be able to say, okay, but step back and be open-minded and think about doing something in a different way than you've ever done it before. And if you trust me just a little bit, we can deliver results. And oh, by the way, I can back all of this up with data. And, and even having those conversations with very senior level engineers who were running global practices for global engineering consultancies, the rate of adoption was very low. And it was just kind of, I don't believe in a lot of what we have done and what has differentiated us from our competitors is that, much like you, we realized early on the role that the internet was going to play in business and driving and changing business. And so we were kind of on the frontier of leading companies down the path of digital transformation, even though we didn't call it that right then. And so every experience of mine, and I'm sure yours as well, coming into an organization has been that of a change agent. I'm going to come in, I'm going to challenge you to think differently, to do things that different than we've ever done before. It's going to require you to take a little bit of faith. It's going to require you to invest some money. But, at the end of this path, you're going to see difference. You're going to see transformation. And the only way it can happen, the only way you can get from here to there is to walk this path. So those are interesting conversations to have. And I would imagine that, like me, you have as many of those very same conversations today as you did 10 years ago.
Every day. It is amazing. Every day.
Every day.
And so maybe a little context, and I know you and I are going to spend more time talking about this. We started as pioneers in the marketing, performance, management, marketing excellence space in 2001. I thought that this would be a discipline of marketing, that it would just skyrocket and take off. But even today, many times it's like deer in the headlights when we're talking with members of the marketing leadership team and how important it is to get the right metrics, the right processes, and being able to use data not only to prove marketing's contribution, but also to make better strategic decisions and investments. It's still pretty surprising that it's still, for many companies, a very early stage journey.
It is. And, I think that I've seen some data that you supplied. I know that the CMO tenure is typically, I want to say I've seen things ranging from 3 years to 18 months. I mean, it is very, CMOs come and go very quickly. And the interesting thing is we expect, it's sort of like professional sports. We expect CMOs to come in and instantly deliver results, or they get the hook. And that's interesting. It's interesting to me. And I think that we set expectations really high. We don't allocate the resources necessary in many instances for CMOs to succeed. There's not an understanding, I think, to a large degree of, in some instances, the budget that's required to make the certain things happen. And so when you can get buy-in, we need to use data, we need to use analytics. There's so many things at our disposal that can allow us to more effectively gauge our marketing spend, our marketing ROI, to tweak and fine tune that to deliver the absolute best results as a result. But it's going to cost us X amount of dollars to make that happen. Or, we're going to have to, it's smarter for us to outsource some of the talent and expertise that we need as opposed to hiring FTEs. And so there's so many different battles, I think, that you have to fight along the way, that there's some real interesting challenges for CMOs and barriers to their success.
So I can't really speak to CMO tenure right now, and that's a conversation we probably should have a glass of wine over, why that seems to happen a lot. But I do want to point to some data, and then maybe talk a little bit about what can a CMO really do, because I think that's Absolutely. What's important. So
Absolutely,
there was some data that came out from one of the very well-known recruiting and staffing firms, and they talked about the fact that last year was a record number of CMOs who lost their jobs. Considering that we're not in an economic crisis last year, that was kind of room for pause, right? Take a moment back. And on the heels of that, Forrester came out with a report at the tail end of last year, predicting that 30% of the CMOs would lose their jobs this year. So if there's a CMO out there wondering if they're at risk, I think that a lot of CMOs are at risk. And even the ones that have made huge investments. In fact, I think one of the challenges facing marketing today is they have made significant investments in technology, lots and lots of tools, and they're not paying off. And the reason they're not paying off is they tried to skip some steps and kind of wanted to pass, go and get $200. And now if they're not careful, they're going to end up in jail, so to speak. So a study that came out by the CMO Council, I think very highly of them as an organization, said, look, CMOs have to show right out of the gate how they're going to impact the business. And we know from our research that we've been doing since 2001 that really only about 1 in 4 marketing organizations and CMOs can really do this very well. So let's talk about what those guys really do and what the other guys could do. So first and foremost, a good CMO is a business person first and a marketing person second. Right. So they kind of shed all that marketing lingo that gets in the way of a communication with the CFO and the CEO. And they're talking about the business. I think that's really an important message because we have so much language inside marketing that we sort of glom onto. And we think that everybody understands what that means. Right? When we're talking about open rates and click-through rates and conversion rates and likes and visits and time on site, all of that stuff, right? Shares, everything. Nobody in the leadership team really cares about that. They do want to understand how the business is, what marketing is doing to move the needle for the business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
And it's a big
so that's
challenge.
it is a big challenge. It's a huge challenge, and it's easy. So we know that there is two things that are statistically significant that distinguishes these value creators or these best-in-class marketers, and they are alignment and accountability. So the first thing is when you go look at those marketing plans, and we get lots and lots of marketing plans every year to review. They come in all shapes and sizes. I am still amazed at how few of them are truly measurable, let alone aligned to the business. They have a list of campaigns and they talk about leads and they talk about activities that they're going to do, whether it's events or email or digital or changing the website, but very rarely are they really talking about the business results. So that's a key challenge. So it starts right there. The starting point is getting that plan right.
Well, and I think that beyond getting the plan right, I think getting the plan right is a challenge, but I think executing on the plan and being able to evaluate your ability to execute on the plan is significant. I'll give you a quick example. We work with a lot of very large technology companies, and we did a kind of a comprehensive campaign for them, for this company, around two pieces of technology that they were hoping to sell in the small to mid-size market. And they wanted to do a series of webinars, and they wanted to, and we own a media company, so we sell webinars and online events and those kind of things to clients, and we manage those things from soup to nuts for them. In this particular instance, this client wanted to manage their own webinar platform because they had the ability to do that. And so we worked with them. We developed the webinar topics. We marketed the webinar. We promoted the webinar. We got leads and registrations for the webinar. But what we found was that they were new to the webinar program that they had purchased. They did not understand best-in-class practices with regard to marketing a webinar. And for us, there's a series of communications and touches and emails and email reminders up to the, an hour before an event happens that we're managing. Those registrants get yet another reminder. Your webinar starts in 45 minutes. Can't wait to see you there. And all of these little steps that happen along the way that leads your prospects where you want them to be. And while this team at this major brand are very, very smart people, they were doing a little bit right and missing so many steps along the way that they were setting themselves up for failure. And so, we were still able to deliver a webinar and to deliver registrants and to have a good experience for people. And, thankfully we could also market that webinar after the fact. But I think sometimes what we see is that brands get seduced by technology. As you mentioned, they have the technology and they either don't have the internal expertise on how to, marketing is so sophisticated these days. And that's why I mentioned earlier, being smart enough to tap vendor partners to outsource some of these things, because it is really difficult these days to afford to build a team that has the capabilities that you really need to execute at a high level these days. And I think that we're going to see more and more collaboration by CMOs and marketing teams with subject matter experts, vendor partner experts, and that's going to be part of the equation for success. In addition to what you're going to talk about, which is understanding how to use dashboards and some of this information that I know you do so well.
Well, Shirley, I totally agree. In the end, it comes down to execution, and that's really critical. If you can't execute whatever plan you put in place, you're lost, right? So pedal to the metal, so to speak, and proof in the pudding and all those other great metaphors. But the key thing comes back to a CMO hopefully having really good people who can execute and do understand whether those are internal or external to their organization. But
Right.
a good CMO has to then communicate back to their leadership team, to their peers, to potentially their board on what they are doing and how they are contributing to the business, and what is and isn't working, and what investments and decisions they recommend the organization make in order to achieve its business goals, whether that's growth related to new markets or new customers, or the adoption rate of a new service or a product, or it's the expansion within a market or a customer base to grow share of wallet, whatever those real initiatives are. And I'm actually using business language, and I'm amazed at when I use words like those things I just mentioned, it's deer in the headlights with many CMOs, right? Because they're thinking about pipeline contribution, they're thinking about leads, right? Again, they're thinking about sometimes win-loss, which is very good. That's a great one to look at, but again, within context. So a key thing that has to happen, first of all, is that a CMO has to know what are the right metrics to use. And those metrics have to sync up to the outcomes the business is trying to achieve. And then there needs to be a very solid link chain between the metrics they choose, so that they can see, oh, this is connected, the connective tissue, so to speak, between the work of marketing, the activities that we're doing, and the programs that we're executing, and the money we're spending. And if you follow that chain, you can see the results. So it's kind of an outcome to impact chain, impact to value chain that you have to be able to create. And if you don't know what that chain is, and you don't craft that chain properly in advance, you'll never be able to create the right dashboard. So that's
Right.
kind of a key message around alignment and accountability for CMOs.
So tell us then, we've talked about a lot of words. Tell us the difference between metrics and data and analytics, because they are different.
Great question. They are different. So data is a piece of information, right? What zip code someone lives in, what color hair they have. This is all kinds of data, whether they, did a positive review or a negative review. So I think that's really important to understand that data, it may or may not have any kind of quantity associated with it, measurability associated with it. It's just good information. And you might actually need a lot of that data, for example, to build out personas, because that gives you the color, the context, the psychographic, demographic kinds of information you might need for a persona. Metrics have some kind of quality or quantity value associated with them. So household income or budget, dollars to be spent, or anything else that you can actually count or in some way qualify, even if it's qualitatively, becomes a measure. And so that's a measure is a kind of data. And then there is a metric, which is the standard. It's a standard against which you are going to perform. So you're setting, it's not necessarily a benchmark, although a benchmark is a metric. It's not always a key KPI. Not all metrics are KPIs, but all KPIs are metrics. And so getting that, so metrics are in that circle of data, but they're a very unique piece of data. And they are in marketing should be tied to some kind of performance. So setting a performance metric in advance so that you can then declare whether or not you were successful is very important. So just counting something after the fact was kind of interesting, but it's only good from a performance management perspective if it's in context. Right. Analytics, I know we've been talking about analytics a lot in marketing lately, but analytics is not a new thing. It's been around a really long time, and it's been a part of marketing a really long time. And really, analytics is just the ability to apply algorithms to data in order to look for trends or patterns or other things that will help you make decisions. And we use those analytics to build models. And as you know, right now, there's a lot going on around attribution and mixed models. Again, not new, but certainly the complexity of the of the digital world, and all the various channels have made that much more complicated. But there's
Right.
lots of models that should be in every marketer's library, way more than just those two.
Right. Absolutely. So
So did that
tell
answer
me
your
then.
question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was great. And I think that those are all words that people throw around a lot and perhaps don't have a firm grasp on. So tell me, I think this is a big challenge. How do you select the right metrics as part of your marketing plan?
That's a great question. And I think that's the perfect starting point for every CMO who's really serious about marketing excellence and marketing performance management. And it does begin by understanding those outcomes that the company that you work for is expecting you to impact, and how much they expect marketing to make a difference. And knowing what that is, and then building out, okay, now that means I have to do X to contribute to that outcome. And to do X becomes sort of your objective in your marketing plan. And here's what I'm going to use to determine whether or not we're successful. So let's pick an example. Let's say the company is trying to get or increase their market share in a particular market, or their rate of growth in a particular market. It could be either one. And they're expecting marketing to contribute to that. And marketing's contribution is going to be some level of adoption of this product in the marketplace. So marketing needs to own some amount of that adoption, which is translated into both share and revenue, right?
Right.
Underneath that will be campaigns, programs, and activities. And each one of those will have a set of performance metrics that, if they're done properly, we'll be able to actually see the linkage from top to bottom and back up again. And that's what we call those chains. Most plans don't have those chains. At the very best case, they may have some activity metrics or output metrics, maybe at the bottom of their plan, like X number of people are going to attend or for a webinar, or X number of people are going to download a white paper or view a recording. X number of people are going to complete a contact us form. X number of people are going to have an initial call with our inside salespeople. Those might be some examples, right? Maybe.
Right.
But those are really down in the activity and output level types of metrics. And so the question that comes back up from the C-suite, when you populate a dashboard with those kinds of things, right? Here's how much we contributed to pipeline. Here's the number of leads. Average lead value was this. So we think we contributed to revenue. They don't believe you because you haven't got the chain that shows that, right? So it's not believable. That's a problem. Most of the time, there's no indication on those dashboards of here's what we committed to do as a performance target. Here's how we actually did. Usually it's just reporting, here's how we did. So there's no, again, context. So it's not believable. So there's all kinds of challenges related to that. So if you don't get the metrics right, and that means your plan properly staged, you can't do as good a job in creating a dashboard, and you end up more with a smorgasbord than a dashboard. So just a myriad of different things that you throw up there and then try to tell a story with.
Right. So how do you combat that? How do you, as a CMO, create the right kind of dashboard with the right kind of information so that when you're having those meetings at, the beginning of the fourth quarter as you're planning for next year or whenever, how do you come to those meetings armed with the right information in the right kind of spreadsheet in a way that is a proof of concept? How do you do it?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to give you, it's really simple. And I'm going to draw on my own personal experience and a personal story because I don't want to put any of our customers on the spot. And I'm going to just take you back to in time for a moment. And I know you can remember this. But early on in my career, I had the privilege of working at a great organization, the Motorola semiconductor industry. And the thing about the semiconductor industry at that time, it was pretty common, pretty pervasive practice to have these things called operations reviews. Today, maybe they're quarterly. Back then, they were monthly. And Shelley, I know we're kind of in the same generation, so you probably remember those days when you produce those things on those little plastic foil-like things. Remember those? You typed up something on a four-phase because you didn't have all this really great technology to do PowerPoint presentations, right? And you ran them through a heater, and you came up with these plastic sheets and you presented, right? So in those early days, I would walk in running marketing, to this ops review, do my shtick, share my slides, and then I would walk out. And one day I had the privilege of being invited to watch my boss present at his ops review. And here I am running marketing. We're an important new business for the organization. And as I'm sitting there watching my boss present, there's not one of my foils, as they were called, in his deck. So nothing in marketing is resonating for him. And I'm spending a lot of money to get these two new architectures adopted in the marketplace and turn them into industry standards. I mean, so you would think marketing would matter, right? And so I had you would think. So I had the opportunity to talk with him about what he needed on those foils. And I remember this poignant moment when he asked me this question. And the question was, what is your job? Unfortunately, I paused and he answered the job for me. He answered the question for me. He says, your job is to drive design wins. That's your job. And I want you to tell me how you are using our money, our resources, and the investments you're making, and how that is impacting design wins. So the takeaway from here, I don't want to bore you with all the details that come out after that and how we got to that conversation, is that he provided with me what is the outcome that he expected me to impact, right? So if as a CMO, you don't know what that is, nothing you write is going to matter. So sit across the table from the people you work with and say, at the end of this year, using this example, how many design wins do we have to have? From where? What kinds of companies? What markets? Which products? And now you can translate that to any company, right? How many design wins do we have to have? It's all about wins. So whatever your wins are, which customers, which markets, which products, and then back up and say, okay, how many of those do you expect marketing to bring to the table? And how would you know that we did? Right. And when you get the answer to those questions, that really can be very illuminating. And when I sit across the table from some of the CMOs that I get the opportunity to speak with, and I ask them those three questions, do you know what those outcomes are? Do you know what they expect you to do to impact those outcomes? And do you know how they are going to determine whether or not you did? They don't know the answer to those questions. So just start there. 3 simple questions, engage in a conversation. Have a real conversation. Does that make sense and help?
I think that makes perfect sense.
It seems really easy.
And I think too, the thing that can be difficult for CMOs in some instances, and we're seeing an evolution of this, but we certainly are not across the board. In many companies that I've had the privilege of working with, the marketing team has been somewhat disconnected from the senior leadership team. And the marketing team, in many instances, far too many instances, can be viewed as a sell sheet designer, an order taker. I need this, so let me get marketing on that. I want to do this, so let me get marketing on that. Instead of being involved in the conversations, answering those questions that you talked about, being a part of the conversation that starts with, what are our revenue growth goals for this year? How are we going to make that happen? How many leads is it going to take? How many touches is it? All of those things. It's all about math, and how much money is it going to take us to be able to get from here to there? And so for marketers, asking for a seat at the table, clawing your way to a seat at the table, always raising your hand. I was having this discussion with somebody the other day, and on the topic of the alignment of sales and marketing, and in far too many instances, the sales team is going in one direction and they've got all different kinds of plans and campaigns and initiatives and goals that marketing is not a part of. And so, as a marketer, I am constantly raising my hand and saying, let me be a part of these meetings. And I can promise, the more I know, the better I can deliver. And so some of it is continuing to beat the drum about the change in marketing's role and how the power in so many instances of getting to those revenue goals rests in the hands of your marketing team, and enabling that marketing team is how you get to the revenue growth and the profitability that you're looking for. And we're so much further down the path today than we used to be when we're ready to hand things off to a sales team to close those leads. So I think it's interesting. And I think that's the message that I try to leave with CMOs and marketers of all kinds, is that, ask for a seat at the table, raise your hand, elbow your way in, don't be afraid to speak up. It's like you having a conversation with your boss about, why none of the information that you provided was part of his presentation. It's having those conversations is how we move forward and how we continue to show the value. And it's so weird to be having this conversation about marketers proving their value, but the reality of it is that that's something that I live every day.
Exactly.
You're just a marketer.
So I love what you brought up. It's right. When it's kind of interesting. We call that group of marketers 1-800-marketing or check the box marketing, right? And what we've learned is that there are really three kinds of marketing organizations from our research, right? And that study's in play right now, so it'll be interesting to see what we learned this year. The first group, this 1 in 4, that they are the value creators, and they are really an elite breed, and they're the ones that have begun a really good job of cracking the nut around alignment and metrics and accountability with dashboards, analytics, all of those questions. There's a really large group of marketers. We call them the sales enablers. And what's interesting about them, and also concerning about them, because they are a very large group, about maybe 40%, is they really see themselves in service to the sales team. So they're not thinking like business people. They're thinking of like sales support, and they're treated like sales support. And they're all about the pipeline. It's all about today filling the pipeline with leads that the salespeople can use to meet their quota. And so when you talk about marketing and sales alignment, that's already a mistake, because the marketing and sales need to be aligned to the same outcomes. Right? If they're aligned to the same outcomes, then they're going to be in step and mobilizing their resources like in an orchestra, each of them playing their own in their whatever music they're responsible for with the instruments that they have, but they're all part of the same orchestra. And so what ends up happening, if they're not tied up to the same score of music, then you're not going to play your part properly. Right. You're going to end up sounding horrible together because you're not working off the same piece of music, right? Someone's one sheet and someone's the other sheet, and you know what that sounds like when they're both playing at the same time. The third group, also a pretty significant group, because remember, 20% are best in class and 40% then are sales enablers. The next group is also a very large group, and these are your campaign producers. These are the 1-800 marketing. That's what we call them. 1-800-marketing, I need a brochure. 1-800-marketing, I need a new landing page. 1-800-marketing, I need a new webinar. Whatever that looks like. 1-800-marketing, I need stuff for the next trade show, right? And that's a very tactically oriented group, and they kind of operate like an agency, and they're kind of stuck on their metrics, because the best they can typically do is talk about what they got done, when they got it done by, and how much it cost, right? So that's that's a hamster on the wheel type of a marketing organization, and I really, my heart goes out to those groups. Mm-hmm. Now, different aspects of these exist in all organizations, as you can imagine. It's not like this pure, right? That there's, really distinct lines and there's no blurs. But there's a propensity, right, within the organization from a cultural perspective. And that's where the CMO has the opportunity, because they're the leader. They are the change agent. They own the culture in their marketing organization. So if they own the culture around being a value creator, they're going to expect and require different things from their team than if they own or run a culture around being a campaign producer. And that also has a lot to do with the kinds of conversations they have with their peers as well as with their leadership team, right? So when someone comes and says, 1-800-Marketing, I need X, the conversation turns to, what is the business outcome this is tied to? What about it do you think is going to change the outcome versus what we have planned right now? What that we have planned right now do you feel is not working that you want to sacrifice? Or is this tied to a new outcome that we haven't even talked about yet? Let's talk about that. And what does that mean for the business, right? So it's a business conversation as opposed to how many, who do you want invited to the webinar? Yeah, let me take an order. So exactly.
And, it really is that easy. And I hope that is the key takeaway for our audience today. It really is that easy, as always going back to those 3 questions. And I think that that's really the path to success, whether you're, in mid-level marketing or whether you're a CMO. I think that those 3 questions are the key to it all, Laura. I love it.
My pleasure. And this has been fun. Okay. I hope we get a chance to do it again.
Absolutely. Well, it's always fun talking with you. And Laura mentioned a survey, and we will include a link to the survey in the show notes for the show. And so that if you haven't yet taken it, I encourage you to do that, because the results of that research will be made available to anyone who contributes. And Laura, it has been so great reconnecting again. It's been way too long. Let's not let that happen again. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Shelley. It's a pleasure. Love speaking with you always.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll talk to you next time.